Conversations across time. 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 Conversations.
Good evening. Welcome once again to Conversations Across Time. I am pleased to have returning for the second part of this conversation. First of all, my co-host Babette Joseph is always here. So Babby, we're happy to see you. It's great that you're back from your travels.
Conversations here. I love them.
I'm glad. And you know, I think you very much enjoyed last week we had, and he's returned again, Secretary Judah Benjamin. Judah Benjamin, Secretary of War, Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense for the Confederacy.
Glad to be back with these three lovely ladies.
Oh, you flatter us.
And we like it.
And we like it, yes, we love it. And seated next to Secretary Benjamin is returning once again a frequent guest on this show, and that's Countess Berthold. Countess Berthold, welcome. Countess Berthold lived and during the period of the rise of Adolf Hitler. She is German aristocracy. Her husband was a commissioned military officer in the German forces, and she joins us once again to shed some light on the similarities between what happened in pre-Second World War Germany and what is going on in this country today. Thank you for returning, Countess Berthold. To my immediate right is President Rutherford B. Hayes. You will recall when we last spoke, we were having a conversation with President Hayes because President Hayes followed the presidency of Ulysses Grant. And Ulysses Grant was the president who, after he followed President Johnson after Lincoln's assassination, but Ulysses Grant did a lot of things to enforce the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. And but he decided not to run for re-election, and hence we ended up with President Hayes as a result of a backroom deal. Welcome once again, President Hayes. I guess that's too much of an introduction for you, isn't it?
I can handle it, madam, very well.
Now,
I've had worse.
I want to say to you that we talked last week about the fact that you pulled the federal troops out of the South. That was the deal. That was the backdoor deal that we allude to, and I'm sure that we have some information up on the screen about that now. But that was the deal that was made because you hadn't won the popular vote, and there was a question as to whether or not you won the Electoral College. And so in exchange for Louisiana, Florida, and Georgia, is it Georgia? I keep saying Georgia, but I think it's South Carolina.
Right.
South Carolina, giving its electoral votes over to you, you made a deal to withdraw the federal troops.
That is true.
That were enforcing the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. Is that, well, the 13th we didn't need to be enforcing.
The 13th Amendment, we should say probably
yes.
Abolished slavery. The 14th Amendment extended to black men the same protections as white men had, and the 15th Amendment gave black men the right to vote.
Yes, well, there are various types of slavery, madam. I must just remind you, there is the traditional chattel slavery that the Confederacy engaged in. And then after Reconstruction, there was the rather state-run slavery of the Negroes, over the Negroes, I must say, where they were consigned to inferior legal status in every aspect. There were always these devices that were used to prevent them from voting and holding office, and deliberate strategies to prevent them from attaining certain private sector occupations.
Or any kind of decent education.
But I want to ask you a question about, you know, we always talk about the fact that the withdrawal of the federal troops from the South enabled the South to return back to the pre-Civil War social status and social climate and economic climate, because sharecropping, of course, was just another form of slavery.
That is true.
But no one really talks about the fact that in addition to your withdrawing the troops from the South, it was where those troops were dispatched to. no one makes the connection that you supported Northern industrialists, and the Northern industrialists were interested in making certain that they quelled the labor movement. That was the beginning of the labor movement. And so those troops were dispatched to various sites to make certain that that the industrialists were able to prevail in labor disputes. No one talks about that.
That is a true that is true, madam. The troops were withdrawn from the southern states, and they were dispatched to quell labor disputes in Pennsylvania and Ohio. As a matter of fact, I have been very close to industrialists of the North and the South, and there's always been a strong interest among the capitalists of both the North and the South to keep working men down in both the North and the South, so that they may acquire their capital and prosper.
Now, I want to ask you. This has always been interesting to me, and that is that the Southern non-slave owning whites were just as much a victim. In fact, the only thing that they didn't suffer was the physical slavery, but they were victims of slavery also, because the slaves were doing labor that working class white, those were jobs that could have gone to working class whites had it not been for slavery. So the idea that poor whites, working class whites, would even put on a uniform and go out and defend a system which in fact was not to their benefit has always been amazing to me. And add to it that here they are, when the troops are withdrawn, not able to make the connection that the troops are being withdrawn to go to the North and put down labor rebellions of other working class whites. I mean, it just seems like the industrialists in this country have always been able to manipulate the populations to their ends.
Ms. Crawford.
That is quite true. Excuse me, sir. That is quite true, madam. That is quite true. It's always fascinated me in politics how you can manipulate the mentality of low-income, working-class men.
If I may interrupt you, President, that was our strategy before the Civil War. That was my friend's strategy after the war between the states, that as long as we could convince the white working-class people that they were better socially than the colored folk down south and the colored folk north, that they would accept what we gave them, and even if they were in poverty or in poor living conditions, as long as they felt they were socially superior to the colored folk, they would be happy.
Morally,
and I hate to say, looking back from my perch in wherever I am, heaven or hell, looking down at the USA today, I find the same exploitation among your political leaders like your President Trump, who is pitting the white working class men and women today against people of color, people of different sexual orientation, people of different religion. It's the same tactic, as long as you can, and I believe I did see a show that Ms. Crawford did with a psychologist, and he talked about how you exploit the other.
Humans this way, and the answer is very simple. You can't treat humans this way, but you can treat cockroaches this way, right?
Right.
So once you convince your group that the out group are cockroaches, it doesn't hurt your conscience to step on them.
Yeah, yeah. It's your job to step on them.
Exactly.
You get praised for stepping on them.
If you get people to think about the other as being inferior, not the same, they're happy and they're willing to go about their business because they feel they're better than someone.
As we see now.
And Adolf Hitler used the same tactics.
He was better.
Yes, in fact, Hitler, he divided the people into two different groups, the Aryan race, which
the
was a very
others.
superior race, And then the Jewish race, very inferior race. In fact, they were considered to be so inferior that the Nazis wouldn't even call them people.
It is exactly what happened in the South. That the slaves, the coloreds, the Negroes, the African Americans, the blacks, which they're called today, were 3/5 of a human being. They didn't even have to be considered as human beings.
We made sure when the Constitution was ratified that for the purpose of electoral act, that they were 3/5 of a person, and of course that led later on, and I was around there. I almost got appointed to the Supreme Court, by the way. I would have been the first Jew on the Supreme Court. I turned it down, but I almost got appointed by President Buchanan to be on the Supreme Court. And
why did you turn it down?
Because I wanted to continue being a senator. It wasn't a big deal to be a Supreme Court thing. And
okay.
The thing is that Dred Scott,
yes,
ratified
that
my friend Justice Taney said that they're not considered a full person. And the thing is, this total irony. Here's the irony in this.
Yes.
I like to say this from a position of looking back. There's a monument to me outside Louisiana.
Wait a minute. That's right. There's a Confederate monument too.
Commemorating my service.
And the fact that you also gave money and supported.
I helped raise most money to finance it. And I was called the brains of the Confederacy. And I was very close to Jefferson Davis, the president. In fact, some people think we were very, very close.
Some people even think that you were lovers.
Well, I don't want to say that, Ms. Crawford, and that's not.
I know,
that's not an acceptable thing during the time that.
Because today
Jeff
we wouldn't
and I
care.
were close, but we did work. Jeff and I worked very, very closely together. But the thing is, I would like to see today, because I noticed that there's a lot of protest about taking down Confederate monuments. And whether to keep them up or not. And I remember seeing it at the protest in Charlottesville, where the neo-Nazis and the Klan and the alt-right were all walking around talking about,
Jews
we will not be replaced by Jews. And
they say Jews will not replace us. That's what they say.
And I just wonder, and maybe President Hayes and maybe the Countess and maybe Miss Babette and yourself will comment on this. What would happen if the protesters wanted to take my monument down?
It's a Confederate monument.
Would the Klan and the neo-Nazis still run around chanting, "We will not be replaced by Jews"? Would they fight to keep my monument up?
To a Jewish American.
I really feel that fools, though, they fail to see that the destruction of all these historical monuments and statues, that is an attempt to really erase and revise history.
Well,
And
the
you feel that
statues
way.
themselves were an attempt to revise history
Exactly.
because they weren't put up
1920s.
until the 1920s, after Reconstruction era was completely turned backwards and ignored to the point of enforcing against. I mean, we had the government enforcing against people who wanted to exercise their civil rights.
Well,
and that's when these monuments went
my
up.
Klan had a rebirth. My Klan
Yes,
got
it
born
did.
again in the 20s, and we expanded, with ma'am and madam. We did not just stick to the colored folk. We went to the Catholics. We went
the Jews,
we went to
and
the
gay
Jews.
people,
We went to
and
all
women.
the Eastern Europeans. We
Yep.
expanded. Our hatred grew.
Yes.
Yes,
And-
yes, and it's growing today
But the,
as well.
But
Which
the
is
Klan, but the Klan's interest has always been to suppress the other, as Dr. Adler likes to say, the other. And what we see happening is that with this suppression, we start to see that we've got a person occupying the Oval Office now who seems to be expanding the membership of the Klan and these fascist
He's
groups.
bringing it into the national discourse in a way that hasn't happened since the 1920s and since you brought the Klan into the national discourse. I think it's important for people to understand who are listening to this that this is not the first time 2017 that the Klan, the alt-right, the Nazis, the haters, the white supremacists, the white nationalists, whatever you want to call them, have been brought into national politics, and we defeated them before, and we can do it again.
But did we ever have a president that supported them?
You got Hayes.
Well,
Yes,
you know, Hayes
no.
didn't outwardly support them. What Hayes
My southern, I mean, I was long good,
We
but
got Nixon.
my southern buddy Woodrow Wilson.
yeah,
My,
Woodrow
sou-
Wilson.
my southern buddy,
Yes, you're right,
my
you're
southern
right.
buddy Woodrow Wilson. Now you know Woody we called him, but you know he was from Virginia and he did not like black people, and in fact,
He screened the birth of a nation
But-
in the White House.
But wait a minute, I want to ask this question. Was not Woodrow Wilson very good friends with D.W. Griffith? Was it D.W. Griffith?
I believe. Well, he knew D.W. Griffith, but I believe that his college roommate wrote Birth of a Nation. I forget his name
Yes.
now, but he was another man from Virginia, a good old Southern boy.
And
that I-
Birth of a
Thomas R.
Nation.
Dixon.
Okay.
That was his name. He
And that was Woodrow Wilson's
Birth
Yes.
of a
roommate.
Nation, we should say, is a film that was made when? In the
1915.
in
Yes.
1915, which recast, revisioned history and made anybody except white men the scapegoat. White men saved the world. White men
But not
made
only that,
America.
it also
was
glorified
horrible.
but it also glorified the Ku Klux Klan.
Yes.
So that,
And the president screened it in the White House.
but not unlike, he seems very similar to me to Donald Trump. I said Woodrow Wilson was very bright.
he was smart.
He was a smart man, but
And
the
very
occupant of the
learned,
White House
learned.
right now is not. But
Thank
the point
God.
of it is the support of the Ku Klux Klan by Donald Trump is very similar to what we
Yes.
saw with Woodrow Wilson. And you're right, I stand corrected on that because. But Rutherford B. Hayes, to your defense, you never outwardly. You might have made these backdoor deals. But I don't think you ever made any statements that were so as disparaging as we have now from the present.
Well, we didn't record things then the way we do now. We don't really know. But
Well,
we don't know of any.
I must say that men of my political class, men as high in politics as I have been, have always underestimated the intelligence of the voter. Like you can convince them of anything, you can, as you say, sell them a line of guff, any nonsense they will accept, and they'll vote for you, no matter what you do to them.
So I just want to make sure we connect these dots. You are responsible for withdrawing, the way that you come to the presidency is you assure the Southern Democrats, the Dixiecrats, that you will remove the federal troops from the South, and the federal troops are enforcing the Reconstruction Amendments, and so that you'll essentially end Reconstruction by withdrawing the federal troops. But you send those troops, they're dispatched to the North to quell labor. And labor is, of course, the same working class white people that you're trying to protect in the South. You're also using those, so the same
Which
that
you
would be the
said you
enemy.
protect.
Yeah, you said you were protecting them. So those are the enemy of the federal troops in the South, but now they become the enemy, the poor whites become the enemy of the federal troops in the North, because those are the people that are occupying the jobs in these sweatshops, in these horrible industrial complexes where people are dying every day because of the deplorable conditions, working 12 hours a day, 6 days a week.
They're not chattel slaves, but they're wage
But
slaves.
they're wage slaves, yes.
As Mr. Benjamin points out, history has shown that you can easily inform low-income white people and working-class white people that they are superior in whatever way possible to any Negro, and they have been brought with that since birth.
Mm-hmm.
And also
It
in
never
that
went away, I agree.
I think, Mr. President,
Yes, Mr.
if
President?
if you were speaking, and you're quite correct, but I think you need to expand that in view of viewing it from the prism of 2017, that they would feel superior not only to colored folk, but to Hispanic folk and Islamic folk,
and people with disabilities,
people-
and
right.
people who
They-
were gay or
as long as you can make someone feel superior, they will accept economic deprivation.
That is true. And in that era, right immediately after the war between the states, or Civil War, however we all put,
it
there was-
matters.
there was-
Actually,
It was
a
the
civil
war between. It was the war for Southern secession.
It,
That's
it
what-
matters. It
Oh,
was a
please.
civil war.
Please let me finish. In that era, capitalism was expanding, industrialization was dominating the whole country. Industrialists were pretty much in charge of the politics of every state, every huge city. And during that time, there was a huge influx of immigrants from Eastern and Southern Europe, and just coming into our country to try to attain some form of what has been called the American dream. To get the idea if they work hard, they will attain prosperity. And
So you were-
there was also a fear of these
Immigrants.
immigrant people that native-born white people could be afraid of them. To create a scare against these immigrant people for some reason or another, pointing out such things like they are of the Catholic faith and the Pope was trying to control the
They
country.
were also called a different race
Yes,
because they tended to be not blonde and blue-eyed Caucasians.
yes,
so
they
they were
weren't even
darker
considered
race.
white. They weren't even considered white. People from Italy and Poland and Russia.
Our present Attorney General has said that we would be, Jefferson Sessions has said, we
It was
would
named
be,
after my good friend.
yeah, we
And
would
his
be a
middle
better
name,
country, he said.
and his
if-
middle name is Beauregard, after one of
Jefferson
our
Beauregard.
glorious generals.
Yes.
Yes.
He said, our present Attorney General said in some past speech that he made that this country would be better off if we didn't have immigrants from Eastern Europe, Southern Europe, or Jews. That's what he said.
Yes, that is.
And he's the Attorney General.
Yes,
It's
that would make
disgusting.
him, a man of that attitude would be a very dangerous and a high position.
But during
Yeah, he's
during
in
your
a high
time, during your
position, and he's very
presidency,
dangerous.
during your presidency, that is the exact ideology that capitalists, industrialists, leaders of this country, that's exactly how they felt.
And that's
Yes,
how
there
the
was
That's how-
common
Countess
attitude
and
of
her
that era.
That's the exact same.
thing that the Countess and her class felt.
Yes.
That they were superior to the Jews, the gypsies, the darker people, the folks who aren't.
But
I mean, tell us
But
how
Babette,
you
I
felt.
want to ask one quick question before we go to the council. One of the other things we talked about now that these federal troops were used to quell labor disturbances in the North. And the interesting thing is that the very same people that they were trying to stop from being unionized were representatives of the same class of people that were now terrorizing blacks in the South, because that's literally what happened. But also there's another population, because the United States was expanding. They had this goal called Manifest Destiny.
And a lot of troops
And
were
they sent troops, that's
to
correct.
exterminate Native Americans.
That's right, that's right.
So in one blow, we kept down African Americans and we decimated Native Americans.
And the labor movement, and
And
the
the
labor
labor
movement.
Yes, people of the capitalist class do not accept very kindly any challenges to their authority.
You could say
they will-
that again.
Yes, they will take any. One of the leading capitalists, the financier Jay Gould, once said in that era, I can hire one half of the working class to attack the other half of the working class, and people desperate for any form of money, income, would take such employment to repress members of their own class. And that's been proven
That's a
time
very
and
profound statement.
Yes.
It has been proven time and again.
And we should, and I hope we'll put that up. We'll put that up for the audience, because that's a very, very profound statement. Just 50% will turn on the other 50%.
Yes,
And
that
that's
is
been
true.
done.
If you make people desperate, they will act desperately. The point is, we should not make people desperate. Not so easy to do. Countess, your people turned on each other because of Hitler promising to bring back some kind of an economy.
But in the Countess's defense, and I'm sorry, you know I'm an attorney by training, so I got to jump in here for one moment. In your defense, in the defense of the German aristocracy, we mentioned President Woodrow Wilson earlier. A lot of why Hitler was able to come into power is that as a result of the Treaty of Versailles,
yes,
all of Germany's everything that they had, the raw materials, the coal industry, all of that was taken from Germany.
And the military.
And the military was decimated, and that was in punishment for World War I. So
Yeah.
when the Countess says, well, but Hitler came to power, we thought we could control him. He comes to power, and all of a sudden I'm driving around in my Mercedes and my husband gets his commission back.
Yeah, we were very angry really at President Wilson. And because, you know, because of the Treaty of Versailles, because the Allies, first of all, they blamed us for starting the war. We lost 10% of our land, and then our military power was reduced. And we had to these preparations to Great Britain and France, and it was an economic hardship to us. In fact, we didn't know what to do. We didn't have any money. In fact, General Douglas MacArthur, he said that the treaty, it wasn't a treaty, but it was a blueprint for perpetual war. So we were very economically depressed at the time. So we were happy for Hitler because, thank God, you know, he's going to help us out. This was our savior.
So was the Reconstructional era a blueprint for perpetual civil war?
Yes, well, Mr. Lincoln, as opposed to the victors of the First World War, tried a more moderate approach in trying to reabsorb the southern states into the Union. To have, all that he asked them to do was to swear allegiance to the Union again.
Let me just say this. I think, and that you're alluding to something that happened in 1864, the Wade Davis bill. Just the interesting thing is, Lincoln's approach, had he lived, was going to be a more moderate one, but you know what?
But when we say moderate, we mean putting off civil rights.
Putting off Reconstruction.
Right.
He's not going to do that.
Ignoring the civil rights claims of anybody who wasn't a white man in the South.
That's right. That's right.
That's what we call
and
moderate.
a lot of people don't understand that. They think of Lincoln as the great emancipator, but what Lincoln was a politician.
I didn't look. I no qualm about criticizing President Lincoln, but like President Lincoln was the ultimate politician.
Yes.
And I was still around. In fact, I had to flee the country because of these loyalty oaths and everything.
Yes.
But he was playing politics because he was afraid he might lose the election, and I wish he would have, to General McClellan, who was the Democrat, and we would have had a peaceful solution to the war. We would have still had slavery. The grand old Dixie would still be flying our flags. Yeah. And I don't know if slavery would have ended on its own, but it would be a far different United States of America.
And with that, believe it or not, we are at the end of another episode. What I'm going to do is ask the panel we're going to close this out, and I'm going to ask the panel if they will stay for just a few minutes so that we can tie up these loose ends, and you'll be able to view these loose ends on our website. So for now, this has been Conversations Across Time. I thank you, Secretary Benjamin. I thank you, Countess Berthold. I thank you, President Hayes. And Babby, you know, I thank you so much.
We thank you. We thank you, V.
And so what we're going to do is we're going to say good night and ask you to tune in for the rest of this conversation on the internet, conversationsacrosstime.com. Good night.
Across time, conversations across time, conversations across time, conversations across time, conversations across time. Conversations across time, conversations across time, conversations across time, conversations across